Okay, so today, talking about cast sheep. And although I have dogs, and although dogs are not in the habit of getting cast, they are animals that have to be taken care of. And one of the things specifically about poodles is the fact that besides that they bark, that they need to be groomed every so often because they don't shed. And so you can see that I have my two poodles in my lap here, and one has ears and one really doesn't have ears, and I'll explain that in a minute. But the fact is, Ginger is the one with the ears, and this is what ears are supposed to look like on a poodle. They're supposed to be nice and fluffy, and of course Gingers tend to be more looking like dreadlocks than anything. But I'm gonna let Ginger go because she's really not happy. But this is what happens when you try to do your grooming yourself, and it just is a mess. Her ears were so matted the last time that the groomer just had to trim them off, and so eventually they will look like Gingers again, but it's going to take a while. But this is Pixie, and Pixie's an old dog, and so she needs lots and lots of extra care. And so she gets special food, and she gets special attention, and sometimes she even needs help going up and down the stairs just because she's so old. And as I was reading through Keller's chapter, it kind of reminded me of taking care of Pixie specifically. She's 15 years old. She was a gift from Doug for Christmas in 2004, and so she's been around a very long time, and she's actually very healthy for a 15-year-old dog. But the fact is, she is an old dog, and she has her little issues. But one of the things that I have to do with Pixie is make sure that she is properly groomed, because her fur can get really, really matted if it gets too long, as you can see is what happened with her ears. And so that they had to just cut it off. So if her hair is not properly trimmed, she can get all kinds of parasites, and she can get ticks and fleas that we wouldn't even be able to see, just because poodle fur is so thick and full and it doesn't shed, and so we don't ever see it. So Pixie is one of our little babies that we have to make sure, and she requires a lot of time. I have to get up early in the morning with her and feed her special food, make sure she goes outside when she needs to, because she can't always find her way to the door, because sometimes she doesn't see very well, she doesn't hear very well anymore, and so she just needs a lot of extra care. And those of you who might have pets will know this, that animals just require a lot of care. And as I was thinking about the shepherd's care for us when we are cast and hopeless, and how our animals would be if we really weren't here to take care of them. And so I'm gonna let Pixie go. She might want to take a little trip off of or she might want to go in the house. But that just gives us a really good idea of what it is to be able to be taking care of animals, and things that can go wrong, and the things that we need to do to make sure that they are well cared for.
All right, you saw that I gave just a little bit of a preview of what my life is like with dogs, and what it is to care for animals, and how important it is that animals need our care. And I know that dogs, basically, they have some wild instincts, and if they're let loose, they will find a means to survive. But the fact is, a little poodle like Pixie would not survive on her own, because she's so small. She would become prey to a predator, and the fact is that her fur just keeps growing and growing and growing. She would get to a point where she was so matted and probably diseased that she would not survive. And so you see that animals require care. And in the case of what Keller is talking about in this chapter of him restoring our soul, he's talking specifically about sheep being cast, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But for preparation this week, you should have read chapter 5 of Keller, He Restores My Soul, and chapter 7 of Lucado, It's a Jungle Out There. And we're talking this week about the burden of hopelessness. And it's good to remember that David was acquainted with the bitterness of feeling hopeless and without strength in himself. This is something that Keller said in his book, which I find interesting, because Lucado is the one that is dealing with the burdens, and the fact that Keller himself uses the hopelessness as an indication of how David felt, I find interesting in how well that these two books really mesh together as we study them. In Psalm 42, verse 11, David says, "Why are you cast down, O my soul, and why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God." And then he goes on. So what we're dealing with this week is what's called the cast sheep. And a cast sheep is a sheep that is lying on its back, its feet in the air. It flays away frantically, struggling to stand up without success. Sheep are so oddly shaped. And they have, I don't know if you've seen pictures, but they have such skinny legs and such a big round body that it's easy for them to fall over and not be able to get up. And that is not the case with my dogs. They don't get cast, but they have other needs that need to be taken care of. What are the causes of casting? When a sheep is cast, there are a few different reasons that this can happen. There are 3 reasons specifically. First of all, they're looking for a comfortable spot to lie down in. And what they like are little depressions. And you know how your mattress is, and you know after you've had it for a little while, it's got those comfortable little holes there. Not too many, because after a while you need to replace them. But it gets to a point where you're just in a nice little position and you feel like, whew, okay, I'm there. What happens after your mattress is too old, which is the case with mine? Okay, I get myself kind of down in a hole, and then trying to get out of the mattress becomes a bit of a struggle. And this is what happens with the sheep. They get down into this hole, and then they wiggle around and they turn, and then their feet come out more and more and more. And then eventually what happens, they wiggle so much that their feet are in the air. And now they can't turn themselves over again. When we were in Brazil, we had a lot of cockroaches. I did not have an infestation in my house, but every once in a while one would show up. And sometimes in the morning I would come out and I would see one lying on its back. And that was an easy target for me because cockroaches move fast. And if it was on its feet, the only way I could get it was with my flip-flop because they have this bounce to them. And so it was fast enough. But if they're on their backs, they're easy prey. I just crunch it with my foot and then pick it up and throw it away. Because when a cockroach is on its back, it can't get up either. And so it's there for the duration. And this is what would happen with sheep. They would get on their backs and now they're not able to go anywhere, and then panic sets in. They start kicking their feet, kicking their feet, kicking their feet. Sometimes they'll bleat, he says. But mostly they're just kicking their feet, just trying, struggling to get back on their feet again. And it's just really hard. 1 Corinthians 10:12 says, "Therefore let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall." And what is this? This is a warning for us not to get too comfortable. It's easy for us to become complacent, just settle in, snuggle into that perfect little spot and not want to move and get out and do things. And it comes to the point where we can't move, and then we start to panic and struggle because we're just not able to get out of it. And this all happens because we are looking for comfort. We're looking for that little safe place where the troubles of the world don't bother us anymore, and everything is just free and easy. And life just isn't that way, because what's going to happen? We're going to get stuck and we're not going to be able to get out of it. And that's even worse. A second motive for casting is an excess of wool. And this is what happens with Pixie. And I showed you her ears. Okay. What happened with her ears? They had gotten matted. And so there was no way to brush them out. And so the groomer had to just trim all of the fur back. And so her ears look weird. And she looks a little ridiculous, and we're all making fun of her right now, which she doesn't care. But this is what happens. And this is what happens with sheep. Their wool becomes so long and so thick that once they fall over, and this causes a really bad center of gravity, and then they fall over and then they can't get back up because there's just so much wool on their bodies, and it just encumbers them. And wool in Scripture depicts the old self in the Christian. It's the outward expression of the inner attitude, the assertion of my own desire and hopes and aspirations. And it's that feeling of just having I need more, I need more, I need more. And so all of a sudden your center of gravity is off because you have so much stuff or so much attitude that you become off balance. And it's a reason for you to be cast. And this is what happens with the sheep. So what does he do? Well, when a sheep has an excess of wool, they shear it. And the shearing process is exhausting for both the sheep and the shepherd. I don't know if you've ever watched videos of sheep shearing, but it is a messy job because that shepherd, he is straddling the sheep, trying to keep it still. And he's got these razor sharp electric shears that he's using. He's going over the wool, and sometimes he cuts them. If you've ever seen a sheared sheep, sometimes they come off with little spots, red spots where they were actually cut the skin. And so it's an exhausting experience for both the sheep and the shepherd because he's using all of his strength to keep that sheep still and get it sheared. And the sheep is wanting to get free and is feeling the uncomfortable sensation of those shears going over his skin and eventually and sometimes cutting it. And when it's over, they're both relieved. And that is a really good picture of how our lives can be so encumbered with things and with excess that we fall to the wayside. We're not able to get ourselves back up again, and we really have to be careful of that. And the third reason that a sheep can be cast is because excess of fat. They've been eating too much. And when they have too much fat, it's not healthy for them, obviously. Their heart, it's not good for their hearts, and it's not good for their bodies because it, again, puts their center of gravity off. There are a couple of references in Scripture which I find interesting that we can relate to this. One is Revelation 3:17. For you say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing, not realizing that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. And these are the words that Jesus was speaking to the church in Laodicea. That was the lukewarm church. That was the church that he wanted to spew out of his mouth because the people had the attitude that they had arrived. They had everything they needed. They were the most spiritual of all beings, and they didn't realize how poor and naked and pitiful they actually were. What does this require? So when a sheep has excess fat, the shepherd puts them on a diet. He reduces the amount of grain that they're allowed to have. He makes them exercise more, and that gets rid of that excess fat, and then the sheep is less likely to be cast. This requires discipline, and this is not an easy thing to do. Hebrews 12:6 says, the Lord disciplines the one he loves. And this is also a quote from Proverbs 3:12. In order to get rid of that excess fat, it requires a lot of discipline. And if you have that excess baggage in your life and thinking that you have everything that you want or need, think again. Because you may be that most wretched of creatures. So you have to think about these three reasons and think about the things that stumble us and think about the things that require us to be restored. I find this first part of the verse is almost like a sigh of relief after the first two verses that we were studying. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. So it's coming to what's called I feel like a sigh of relief. So the sheep is cast. It's down and out. It cannot help itself. And that is who we are first as non-believers, but also sometimes as Christians. We get into these positions and there is no way out for us, and we are feeling hopeless. We're in the midst of a pandemic. A lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of people have been out of jobs for weeks. And I imagine that some of those people are starting to feel a little bit hopeless because there aren't a lot of jobs to be had. And restarting the economy is going to take a pretty good trick, and it's not going to be just a one day to the next that all of a sudden there are going to be these jobs and people are feeling hopeless. What about ministries? You've been in a ministry for so many years and now you don't know what the Lord has for you. It leads sometimes to a feeling of hopelessness. But what do we need to know about the shepherd? And the fact is that the shepherd restores, and there are 4 ways that he restores us. First of all, he is attentive to the sheep. He counts them, he seeks them out, he protects them. Think about the parable of the 99 sheep, where the shepherd left 99 sheep to go find the one that had been lost, because most likely it had been cast. And when it's cast, it can die sometimes within a matter of hours or days, a long, slow, agonizing death. So what does the shepherd do? He is diligent, and he goes out and he searches for that sheep. It is all his work. The sheep is doing nothing. The sheep is on its back and can't do anything. But the shepherd is out there looking. He's left the others that he knows won't be harmed, and he goes and finds the one that could very well be harmed. And he is always counting them, making sure that he has the right number. He is looking for them, and he is protecting them. He also he finds the cast sheep, and because if it's been there for any time, there is the danger of the buildup of gases in the rumen, and so you can't just take that sheep and just set it over on its legs. You have to actually turn it over on its side and let some of those gases be relieved before you can stand it up again. So he turns the sheep over gently to alleviate the gases. And in the meantime, he's massaging the legs, because what's happened? The feet in the air means that there's no blood flow. And you know how that is when you've been sitting on a foot or your hand falls asleep, and when the blood flow starts back in and you get those prickles and tingles and things, how that feels. And that's exactly what's happening with the sheep as the blood goes back down into the legs. So he massages them so that the blood flow can be easily relieved, and so it can be able to stand up, because that's the other reason. He won't be able to just stand the sheep up, because they won't be able to support the weight because of the gases and because there's just been no blood flow to their legs. So he has to be very gentle about it. And the fourth thing that he does is he speaks gently to the sheep. He does not go in and scold. He just very gently, as he's massaging, he talks soothingly to the sheep. And what does that do? It calms the sheep down. Remember, that feeling of hopelessness can often lead to panic. And when people are in panic, they can't listen. So what do? They speak softly, they croon, they relieve, and they massage. And eventually he's able to put that sheep up on its legs, but he's still straddling the sheep to make sure that it's steady. And this is something that happens with Pixie because she's so old and she has some arthritis in her back hips. Sometimes when I put her down, she falls down because she's just not ready to stand up. And so I put her up on her feet, make sure she's steady, and then I let her go for her to be able to go off and do what she needs to do. And this is how it is with the sheep. When the shepherd restores, it's a 4-step process, and it's a very deliberate process, and it is not pleasant because that sheep has had some pain because of the gases and because of the blood flow being gone from the legs. But eventually that sheep is up on its legs and is ready to scamper off and be with the rest of the sheep. And this is the process of restoration. So the hope in restoration that we have as people now, according to Lucado, has three aspects. First of all, the hope of restoration lies with a person. That person is not just any person. That person is a person who knows the way out. He used the analogy of being in a jungle, and I don't know if any of you have ever been in the jungle, but if you have, you look overhead and there's what's called a canopy overhead, and you can't see the sun. It's very dark, even in the middle of the day in the jungle because of this. And you can you can get lost in the jungle. And because it's just, there's nature around you, which is beautiful, but it all looks the same after a while. You don't know if that tree is the one that you saw an hour ago or if it's a new tree. And so you really, when my mom went to the Amazon jungle on a trip one time, anytime that they went into the jungle, they went with a guide. And that person was the person who knew the way back out again, because they could very easily have gotten themselves lost. So your hope lies with a person, and that person is a person who knows the way out. Your person also has to have a vision. They're the ones that have to tell you, okay, because you're feeling so hopelessness, they're the ones that tell you this is not the end. This is not the end of it. I know the way out. We're going to get there. Hope in me. And that person has direction, okay? Having a vision and just saying this is not the end is really great, but if they don't have a direction and know which east from west, north from south, then it's not going to do you much good. And that person who has vision and direction is the one who can restore your hope in full. And so you count on that guide, because that guide that takes you into the jungle is the one that will also lead you out, because not only does he know the way out, he has a vision to know that this is not the end of it, and he knows which way to go. So you put that hope in this guide who is leading you through the jungle. You are that cast sheep. He's put you on your feet. He's told you this is not the end. We're going to get out of here. The results of that are three. First of all, your loneliness diminishes. Okay? Imagine yourself alone in the woods, lost. But because you have that person there who has found you and is going to take you out, think about the cast sheep when that shepherd finally finds him. Relief, because he's not alone anymore. Your hopelessness diminishes, or your loneliness diminishes because you have fellowship. Your despair decreases because you have vision. Okay, this is not the end. I'm not going to be so desperate anymore. And your confusion begins to lift because you have direction, okay? I'm not confused anymore. Oh, okay, the guide knows. He knows which tree is which. He knows because he is the good shepherd and he is the one leading you out. So what do we all need to remember in all of this? In the fact that we can become cast, in the fact that we can become lost, in the fact that we can become hopeless in our lives. We need to remember, above all, that we are not made for this world. These things are going to happen to us because we live in a sinful, fallen world. And we have to remember that as Christians, born again in Jesus Christ, our Savior, that we were not made for this world. 1 Peter 2:11 reminds us, "Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul." Don't let these things cast you aside. Don't let these things distract you to the point that you become cast on your back with your legs in the air, not able to right yourself. Colossians 3:2 says, "Set your mind on things that are above, not on things that are on earth." The sheep that gets cast is because he's thinking about the things that are happening right around him right now, and doesn't think about the greater picture. He doesn't have the ability to reason, to think that, okay, if I lie down in that little hole there, I probably will get turned over on my back and not be able to get up again. He doesn't think that. She doesn't think that. We don't think that sometimes. We get so hung up on what's going on in this world that we forget that what's above is so much more important. And if we think and we come to that little depression, or we come to that comfortable spot on our couches and think, okay, if I sit there for too long, I'm not going to be able to get up again because I'm not focused on what is important. So we have to remember that we are not made for this world, and we have to also remember that He is our help. He is the one who seeks us. He is the one who finds us. He is the one who restores us. We cannot do this of our own will. Psalm 121, 1 and 2 says, I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, God is faithful, and He will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with temptation, He will also provide a way of escape that you may be able to endure it. What is that way of escape? It's Him. It's His help. It's Him putting you on your feet again, allowing you to get the blood flow back to your legs for you to be able to walk with Him helping you. So remember this, that when you're hopeless, there is restoration. He is the one that restores us. He is the one that guides us out of the jungle. He is the one that gives us vision and gives us the ability to see that there is more to this world than what is right here. There are the heavenly things that we need to think of. And I want to conclude with what Keller says, which says, I know of nothing which so quiets and enlivens my own spiritual life as the knowledge that God knows what He is doing with me. Have a great week. I'll see you next time.